My name is Ben and graduated in 2022 with public health. My question is, what character from the Bible do you think most embodies your life?
Hey everyone, and welcome to Meet the Prof. I'm Shane Hartley, and my friend Spence Hackney and I are so excited you're with us. Thanks for joining us. And our mission in this podcast is to help encourage Christ-centered conversations on the college campus. You know, at least one reason that's important to us is because Jesus has become taboo on the college campus. You're not supposed to talk about him. In fact, even just this week, I heard about a religion professor who told his students, you are not allowed to talk about Jesus in here. So our prayer is that God will change that. And we're so glad you are with us and really excited. Today, you get to hear our interview with Rob Niewoehner. Rob is a professor in the Department of Aerospace Engineering at the U.S. Naval Academy. And he shares about his experience with fighter jets, how he mentors a younger generation, and how God's given him direction over the years in his career, some things really practical. And so I think you're really going to enjoy this. And before we jump in, if you would please remember to subscribe or follow, click whatever buttons on your app there. It doesn't cost anything, and that helps get the word out. And please help us by sharing this with a college student you know, or another professor, or a parent of a college student, someone you think would be helpful to. So let's get started. Here is our interview with Rob Niewoehner. Hey, Rob, this is great. Thank you for taking this time to be on Meet the Prof. And
pleasure.
You're a recent addition to our Meet the Prof family. So I was wondering, how did you learn about Meet the Prof, and how did you decide to put your spiritual journey, some of your spiritual journey, on meettheprof.com?
Okay. I've been associated with the Faculty Commons and its predecessor ministry for almost 20 years. And so I was aware of Meet the Prof when that effort was launched a couple of years ago, and it's just plain tardiness on my part in terms of logging in, doing the work, and throwing it up online. My son, who's also a prof, he's at University of Indiana. He got his profile up on Meet the Prof before I did, and then was scolding me for, okay, Dad, it's time for you to upload yours as well.
Scolded you like a good son does.
Yeah. Oh,
you're the first one to be interviewed. Now you can encourage him to be interviewed here.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's great.
So I saw in your profile that you wanted to be an industry test pilot if you could do another profession, which I love. Do you still fly a lot? Is that something you're active in?
Oh, I do. Yeah, so. And it's not really on my profile. My students are well aware of it, but I've been in the Navy almost 50 years now.
Okay.
So
wow.
Flew F-14s through the 1980s, moved into the Navy's flight test world through the 90s. So I am an experimental test pilot, and continue to fly actively with my students and supporting experimental flight test work for the Navy. And so, I'm actively flying. I'm no longer on active duty. I spent 34 years in uniform, but and the last 13, 14 years then as a professor, civilian professor at the Naval Academy.
Well, thank you for your service.
Oh, that's a privilege.
And my follow-up question is, what's your favorite airplane you've ever flown? If you've got to fly all the crazy experimental stuff too.
Yeah. So. I cut my teeth in the Tomcat, which was the muscle car, really fast, but it was a maintenance nightmare. And, keeping the airplane, every time you took off in an F-14, you had to inventory what was working, and move into the Hornet, move into the Super Hornet, Hornets and Super Hornets. Everything always works. And so, I put a big chunk of myself into the development of the Super Hornet through the 90s. And so really proud of that airplane's accomplishments and achievements over the years since we introduced it to the fleet.
Yeah. But that rotating wing on the F-14 is just hard to beat. Like, that was just the coolest when you were 15 years old.
As I said, it was a muscle car. The airplane was super fast and could actually fly long ways, but the maintainability was killing our sailors.
Pretty cool. I'm a little jealous. I think everybody who grew up in the Top Gun generation wanted to be you. and now I'm meeting you, and so I'm burning with jealousy a little bit here.
Rob, did you play beach volleyball?
No,
when you're
no,
younger.
that was never. See, I was an East Coast fighter pilot, not a West Coast fighter pilot. That was a Miramar thing.
Okay.
Okay. Because now I've got the mental image. You just ruined the interview for me, Shane. I just want to point that out.
And so, since will come up, the second movie was way better than the first. The first was cartoonish, cartoonish characters, unrealistic flying. The second one, the flying was very realistic.
Really?
Really?
Oh yeah, and then the characters were much more rich and nuanced, and then the detail that they put into the F-14 scenes startled me with just how many little tiny things they got right that only a Tomcat pilot or Rio would recognize. So that made me. I walked out feeling really good about their attention to detail in the second movie. Very different film.
That's encouraging. Yeah. It was super fun. They remade that movie because I got to take my kids to it. I've got 3 boys that are, late teens, early 20s. And I'm like, this is what your dad worshiped when I was your age. Like, this is what we all wanted to be. Now you get to see it. And they did a good job with it. You're right. I mean, it was a great second. All right. So college can be an incredibly embarrassing time for a lot of us. We need to hear your most embarrassing moment as a college student.
So probably freshman year. So when I was an undergrad as a midshipman at the Naval Academy, we had Saturday classes. And so I can remember one particular Saturday, I had early morning crew practice. So I was out on the water rowing in the morning. And so it was probably a 5:30 boat up or something like that. And then came back from practice. I didn't have a first period class. I did have a second period class. And so I went to sleep in the room next door to my second period class. I was a freshman enrolled in a sophomore physics class. I woke up midway through the second period in this panic because I could hear my prof next door. And I come bolting into this room. Again, as a freshman or plebe at the Naval Academy in a class of all sophomores, I come bolting into the room in the middle of the period with just my hair sticking up straight because of sleeping. I was just sleeping on a desk in the room next door and in this panic. And the whole class just bust out laughing.
So is being a plebe at the Naval Academy really as bad as everybody says?
No, I mean the whole idea is to make it a stressful year, and it's a year of not enough sleep. The summer is supposed to be the most intensive part, but we get through it. Yeah. Yeah.
Spoken like a true Navy man. We just brush it off. No big deal. Get it.
Well, I love the story you began telling about your spiritual journey on meettheprof.com. And you said there were 3 influences in your life, one being Natalie, who you ended up marrying, and then one was your roommate, I assume in college, like your best friend. And then the third was reading the Bible. So how were these influential for you coming to know Christ?
They all kind of came together. So I graduated from the Naval Academy in 81, went off to flight school and was in the jet pipeline, got my wings. And during that time in flight school, I lived with one of my teammates. I was a lightweight rower for the crew team. And then when we moved to Virginia to Oceana Naval Air Station, he was learning how to fly the A6 Intruder. I was learning how to fly the Tomcat. This is 83, 84. Ray, my roommate, best friend, and this coxswain, Ray was a young believer involved with the navigator work, and I was not a believer. I'd been to church as a child, but really had no particular impact. I had no convictions. If anything, I was kind of anti-Christian during those years that Ray and I were living together. But then 3 things then over the 1983, 84. The death of a lot of peers around me. We were crashing airplanes, or airplanes were bumping into one another to fatal effect. I met Natalie at a dinner for the widow of a friend of mine who was shot down over Lebanon, 4th of December, 83. So the first thing was a lot of guys were dying around me. Peers were dying around me in airplanes. And so that was a little jolting to watch that happen. The second was, my behavior troubled me, and in such a way that I lied to my roommate routinely when I went out at night. And that bothered me. Okay, why do I feel compelled to lie to my best friend of years about how I spend my time? And then he aggravates the situation by asking me to read the Bible with him. And he and I read through John chapter 1 and John chapter 2 on our own. John chapter 3, I read on my I read John chapter 3 on my own, and in it, towards the end of that interview between Jesus and Nicodemus, a Jewish elder, Jesus, in one of his replies, says, "This is the testimony: light has come into the world, but men are afraid of the light because their deeds are evil, and they're afraid they'll be exposed." And when I read that, I thought, "Oh my word, that's talking about me." I wonder what else this book has to say about me. And so that launched my spiritual journey. That was spring of 83. Natalie, my girlfriend at the time, came to Christ shortly thereafter, again, through the influence of the Navigator work in the Hampton Roads, Virginia area.
That's a great Christian group.
That began our kind of our Christian walk together. So it's more complicated, but you don't have time for that.
There's a lot.
Sounds like, that's. I can imagine all of those things being incredible forces for you, of making you reconsider your life and your relationship with God. And it's encouraging to me how the Bible itself was a real turning point for you, where you were.
Oh yeah, I certainly had that. That experience of the Word of God is living and active, sharper than any double-edged sword, penetrating divided soul and spirit, joints and marrow, judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. And that's exactly what that passage in John 3 did with me on that occasion. So,
yeah. And I was thinking about losing so many friends at such a young age. That's got to change a guy. I can imagine that's pretty profound. Did that? Tell us about that a little more.
Well, that was just it. It was too commonplace that there at Oceana we had probably 12 F-14 squadrons. We lost 9 airplanes and 8 guys were killed. The squadron that I joined, so this was about 20 airplanes. We lost 2 airplanes and 2 guys the week I checked in. There were in subsequent years, I watched guys die in terms of trying to land on the carrier. One particularly notable, January of 97, watched 7 guys die in a crash on the flight deck. So, it was just that my mortality became very palpable at that point in time.
Yeah.
So, ergo, it compelled me to start to think about things much bigger than myself, because I started to realize just how finite I was and how frail I was.
Yeah. One of the attributes of a 20-something is that thought that you're going to live forever. And it seems like that was shaken up pretty good with you early on.
Yeah, quite quickly.
Yeah.
It was an exciting life to be a naval aviator through my 20s, but at the same time, the number of guys that died around me was evident of the hazard in which what we were doing.
Yeah. So you've obviously done some pretty hard, uncomfortable things in your life. Like you opened one of them. Have you had ever a situation where you felt the Lord was leading you, or your faith was leading you to do something hard or uncomfortable that you might tell us about?
I think that more specifically, not so. Because there are no shortage of things that were hard or uncomfortable, or things for which, I feared for my safety. That was kind of a little too commonplace. But more, it was, a variety of career decisions through the years in terms of how I was going to invest my life. That's where, Natalie and I gave over to God. Okay, what is it that you want us to do here? And then, so, watching that, watching my naval career unfold was one where we put that in God's hands. So
yeah. Now, was that more just you sort of stepped back and tried not to drive it and let God drive your naval career, or was it more of an active decision guidance?
There were two occasions. There were two occasions in which Natalie made a suggestion to me about career opportunities, and in which I told her, "Oh, no way is that going to happen? That's just not a feasible path." And in both of those cases, exactly what she suggested is exactly right? Yeah. And in the latter case, it was months later. So, and let me go into that because and that is, so, I was flying, but the 80s and 90s flying, 80s operationally, 90s in flight test. And then as I came up towards the end of the 90s, and this is how I became a professor, is I'd flown all day, an experimental flight test, probably had a 4-hour flight in a Super Hornet. And we drove up to the Naval Academy to watch Handel's Messiah. We're walking across the parking lot back to the car. And Natalie said, "Well, would you ever think about teaching here?" Now, I'd had my PhD. The Navy, sent me to grad school years earlier. And I said, "Oh, no, I just don't see that happening. That's just not going to be feasible." And so that was December of 97. 3 months later, I had orders to the Naval Academy to teach. and I've been on the faculty now for 26 years.
She's very discerning.
Wow.
Isn't she?
So yeah, she's very discerning. But see, part of that too was at that point I was flying actively and doing again the development of the Super Hornet, but I was also trying to figure out, okay, what do I do, with the rest of my career? I was about just shy of 40 years old, had a PhD, and I was thinking about, okay, do I retire at 20 and maybe go to seminary, go into parachurch ministry? Do I teach? Do I stay on the path I was at in terms of being a engineering program manager within the Navy, which was what my Navy leadership had planned for me? And I started coming to this conclusion that's like, no, I really think I want to teach at the undergraduate level. And because of the criticality of the undergraduate experience and the development of young people and the opportunity for ministry. And then the opportunity arose for me to do that and at an institution that I love, which in fact sends people to the world. So that move in 98 out of what I was doing in experimental flight test and in naval aviation program development into higher ed and into teaching was it was the first time I'd ever made a career move that really closed a lot of paths to me. It was one that I did with the greatest confidence that I was doing exactly what God wanted us to do with our living, do for a living, which was to be involved with the lives of undergraduates and to help see them grow. And it was, the Navy wrote the orders, but it really was a ministerial calling to come and be involved in the lives of these undergrads.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's double click on.
You're probably going to say the same thing I am, Shane. I want to underscore that comment that you went into teaching professorship with undergrads because there was more of a ministry calling there than going to seminary and working for a paratroop organization. That's profound.
Yeah.
I want every professor to hear that. Like, you are in ministry here, in very effective ministry. Good. Yeah. That's excellent.
Well, I mean, and again, so my first 13 years in our class and teaching was in uniform. And then the last 13 years has been in a coat and tie. We still wear coats and ties at the Naval Academy for civilian faculty. But but I mean, mentoring is part of my daily job. I mean, that's what the Navy wants me doing, is investing in young people. And so
that's great. Yeah.
Airplanes are simply in context.
Yeah. But they're a pretty fun context. You've got to admit.
It is a fun context.
Pretty awesome.
And I'm kind of the fighter geek on the faculty in the sense that, I love the numbers and I love the mathematics, but I also love going flying on a beautiful day. And I love the connections that I make with students in the airplane, because there's some things that we can talk about repeatedly over semesters. And it's not until I get them in an airplane, they go, this makes so much sense now. And so that realization, that moment in which they have this sudden, I understand this now, that I get with them when I have them in an airplane is just, I love that experience. So
you're a teacher.
I want to go back to school. I'm ready.
Well, let's dive in more about your relationship with students. And, one of our favorite things is we take questions from students and ask them. And we actually have a question from a guy named Ben, who's a recent graduate. So take a listen to his question here.
My name is Ben and graduated in 2022 with public health. My question is, what character from the Bible do you think most embodies your life?
Wow, Ben, that's an interesting question. The character that embodies my life. Well, when I do those gift surveys, the one that comes out that says, my personality type is most like Nehemiah. And so I'm not sure what's the character that, how I would relate to the character in Nehemiah. I was talking with a grad last week at lunchtime, and he was talking about his frustration with his own sin and just recurring patterns of behavior. And I told him, I said, one, you're not alone. I am so there as well, and we are not alone. And so I opened Romans 7, and we went to Romans 7. I said, listen to Paul express his exasperation with how slow he grows in maturity. What I want to do, I don't do. What I don't want to do, that's what I do. I found this I find this law within me. I said, so this path of exasperation with our own immaturity and our lack of character. So I don't want to pretend to Paul's eloquence or his spirituality, but that passage in Romans 7 that Paul records for us, I find to be so encouraging, because his frustration, I feel it too.
Mm-hmm.
What a great truth. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What a great
and Nehemiah, he's often used as an example for leadership. So I see you leading in a lot of real ways, but you're describing now a leadership by mentoring. It sounds like you have a real passion for mentoring.
I do, yeah.
So I read on Meet the Prof that you said that you love seeing your students change. You said that even though you're teaching airplanes all the time, you're a people person. You're in the people business, and you love seeing young people grow. So how do you like seeing your students grow? How have you seen any of them grow?
Yeah, so teaching in a small department and in a major where I see largely major students, it's common for me to have students 3-4 semesters over the course of their 3 years in the major program. So from their sophomore year through their senior year. So there's just a tremendous amount of growth that occurs between. So in this class that just graduated, in the class of 24, many of them I had 4 different semesters. I had them in the fall of their sophomore year, and then junior years in the spring, and then both semesters as seniors. And so, their maturation, their growth, their confidence, the development of their skills, it's just real evident. Starting to own more, take more initiative. I see that trajectories, and that's really satisfying. That I see students who, as sophomores, are struggle with confidence, and grow in their confidence. I see students who are the transition, for example, in my most recent graduating class. from a group that was particularly distrustful of one another when they were sophomores, believing that they were competing one another, and if I help my classmate, then I'm hurting myself. This zero sum mentality, and it was really lovely to watch the class of 24 grow out of that. And into a number of really rich friendships. And by the time they graduated, a lot of wonderful team behaviors and being very mutually supportive of one another. That was a real transition in the character of that entire graduating class, which was lovely to watch. I also have the privilege of staying connected with a lot of my students. And so I probably hear from 2 to 3 grads a week, and they could be they could be a year or two removed. They could be 20 years removed from the Naval Academy. But I mean, if they've stayed in the Navy, they may be in flight test. And then there was 2 summers ago, I was working for one of my students from 10 years earlier, where I was doing essentially the data reduction for some flight tests that he was doing as
the student becomes the master.
yeah, that was pretty interesting. So, there too, I got, being able to watch them grow across years as they shoulder more and more responsibility and, have families and are making career decisions, and being able to be involved in those conversations is just really, really a privilege.
Yeah. No, it occurs to me that I think you're the first professor we've talked to at a military school. And I'm curious what rules or pressures there are about speaking openly about your faith or about Christ within that context.
So I am a federal employee. I'm no longer an active duty officer.
Okay.
But there's part of me that is and will always be a Navy captain.
Yeah, sure.
The students address me as professor, not captain typically. Though, when we get in an airplane, my identity is I'm a naval aviator.
Yeah.
So I have constraints as a federal employee in terms of not advocating for any particular perspective. I can be, there's actually some wonderful guidance that was published during the Clinton administration, Department of Education. I think most Christians in faculties, they have more freedom than they actually realize they do. And it's well articulated by some documents that were published during the Clinton administration. So most spiritual conversations arise because students initiate them. And when they pose a question, I consider I have complete liberty to answer their questions. What it is the initiative, but the initiative needs to be theirs. Now, many students will wind up passing through my home at different points of time, and in my home, that's a different relationship. But in the classroom and in our office building on our campus, I'm eager to answer their questions, and many have questions, and I have a complete liberty to answer their questions. It's just that initiating spiritual conversations, apart from simply identifying for Christ, is again, I need to comply with the guidance that would apply to me as a senior naval officer, or as a civilian faculty member, a federal employee.
Are you able to share that you are a Christian at some point in the relationship?
Oh, absolutely.
Is that what you think leads into these questions?
Well, yes, and hopefully, again, if I see students over the course of 3 years, such as I did this class of 24, they're going to see me make blunders, and they're and I'll tell them candidly when I get to know an incoming class, is that the Bible informs my ethos. And if I'm not acting consistently, if they see me acting inconsistently with that ethos, I want them to let me know that. I want to be told.
Brave.
And
that's
so,
pretty bold.
And that it is my responsibility to love them. And sometimes that love is going to express itself in terms of firmness. But it's going to mean that I'm obliged that my belief in Christ, and the ethos that then comes from the Bible obligates me to love them, and that my primary role is to serve them. Now, this may not be known to you, but the Marine Corps. So the Naval Academy, we actually graduate. We commission officers in both the Navy and the Marine Corps, the Naval Services.
Okay.
So a fifth of our students go into the Corps. The Corps' ethos is very outspokenly one of love. I have a
Okay, I would not have put that together.
no. Oh, I know. But three times, when my son, so my third boy is a Marine infantry officer. In his first year as a young lieutenant, he heard general officers or colonels tell him and his cadre, his peers, your first job is to love Marines, and all else pales.
Is that right?
Yeah, in three different venues from three different senior officers, and they all use the exact same language. So this is deeply, this ethos of leaders eat last, that the Marine Corps, that's part of the Marine Corps ethos. They talk about it, and their leadership is unabashed in challenging their whole officer corps from the general officers down, that the first responsibility of a Marine officer is to love their Marines. And that's the language they use. I don't have any problems telling my students when I first meet them, my job is to love them. And loving them well is going to manifest itself in a variety of different ways. But that's my goal. And I want to know from them when I don't do that well.
Yeah. But like that strikes me as a lot like how Jesus led, of course, with this idea of servant leadership. I'm here to love you. I'm here to shepherd you. And I imagine that the Marines did not arrive at that, love the people you serve the same way Jesus did, but it's still true. It still works. The outcome is still what you want it to be. That's pretty incredible. But thank you for that nugget. That's something I would never heard otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's borrowed from Christianity, the love. Yeah, that's really encouraging.
There you go.
Well, Rob, let's dive into our lightning round questions then. So you can answer these however you want. We call them lightning round because we are squeezing them in here with quickness. So the first one is, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self if you could go back in time?
Yeah. So my big lament, perhaps, for my undergraduate years was my focus on my own advancement, and prioritizing relationships was not important to me. And so that's the kind of that would be my charge to that 18-year-old self. So because I had not yet met Christ, I would not have been at a place to appreciate why that was so important. But I was absorbed as an undergraduate with my own advancement.
Okay.
Professionally, athletically, and academically.
Yeah, and you can look back and see that. Thank you.
No, that's powerful. Relationships. All right, so your graduating seniors are a little different than most. We understand that. But with that in mind, what advice would you give them before they go off into the world?
So yeah, my seniors are different, but I think they need to broaden themselves. And this actually probably applies to all undergraduates in the sense that you have a major and your academic program has probably has some breadth to it, but largely it's focused in a particular major area. You're an economics student or you're an engineering student, and I would say that particularly in those years post-graduation is work to become more T-shaped. In the sense of, don't neglect your specialization in the field that you studied and are working in, but broaden yourself. I'm an engineering professor, but I love history. I love reading great writing. And so, that would be my encouragement, was become more T-shaped, study some things that are outside of your home discipline or even the discipline in which you're working vocationally.
That's great. Love it.
Okay. What advice would you give to other Christian professors?
Well, I actually had another answer prepared for that question, but I think that in light of the conversation that we just had, is this issue of figuring out for themselves what does it mean to love their students, and what is it going to look like? 20 years ago, perhaps, I heard a tape by Ken Elzinga at University of Virginia, and the title of his message was "Teaching as Foot Washing."
Wow.
And I just consider that a classic piece on the role of the Christian professor in higher education.
Wow.
Connecting with other Christian faculty, I think, is valued to start to contextualize and see your discipline through the lens of the Bible. So, it's a lightning round, so I'll cut it off there.
Great.
Well, I actually have a follow-up for the lightning round. I was wondering if you all have any kind of a gathering for Christian faculty at the Naval Academy.
I led one for years. It has lapsed recently. I would say the past 10 years, no. There's a network of us who kind of work together informally and have studied together or encourage one another. But it's not as and we were early influenced by Ray Melichamp's book, Ministering the Secular University, which is very good. But that's not something we've formally had in the past 10 years.
Yeah. Maybe sometime in the future.
Yeah.
Very good. So how have you seen God in your field of study, and how has that helped you worship him better?
Oh, let's see. That one's the easy one because and the last class, I teach in a room that has glass on two sides, so it's a corner room. We look out on the room, and my office look out on the Severn River. So outside the window, we'll have osprey. They'll build nests on the light standards, and the osprey will fish in the river. Bald eagles fish in the river right outside our classroom, and my students will tell you that I will always stop class to watch birds fly. And I teach aeronautics, and so there's a lot of that's so much beauty and actually engineering concepts and the way in which birds are designed and adapted. Whether it's the way in which a swallow wing works, or the raptors like the osprey and the bald eagles that are just. Yeah, I'll always push pause on whatever conversation I'm in to watch a bald eagle, no matter how often I see it.
I love it. I love it. Has it ever struck you that God could have made every bird a pigeon, and we would have never known the difference, right?
And we would be impoverished.
I fish. Like I'm a water guy, and I think about that with all the fish. It's just out of generosity and joy that he made the diversity of creation.
Yeah.
Because one fish would have been enough. One bird would have been enough. But instead we get this plethora of options.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, and last lightning round question is, what's something you think people would be surprised to know about the life of a professor?
The life of a professor. The downside to the life of, and my situation is a little unique because we have no TA, so I have to do all my own grading. That's just really painful to do it well, particularly writing. To do it well and to give people good critical feedback is just very time consuming, and that's perhaps the most challenging element. And that all takes place out of sight. It's largely going to occur, in a prof's home or late at night or on the weekends where they're, just trying to give students good feedback and that part takes place out of sight.
Most students only aware of the pain that those papers cause themselves. So that's insightful to know about the professor's perspective.
Yeah.
Well, Rob, thank you for being so available for students to learn about you, coming on here, putting your testimony on meettheprof.com. How can students follow you or even be able to contact you if they had questions?
So personal email, robniewoehner at me.com. So robniewoehner at me.com is the best way to contact me. They can certainly contact me through my Naval Academy email address as well, and that's easy to find online. I don't have time for social media, so they're not going to find me there. I have some accounts, but it's not something I keep track of. So
that's great. Well, I'll put your personal email in the description of the podcast too, so people can find it. So
thank you.
Well, Rob, thank you so much for this. Very grateful for you being open about your story, and it's a joy to get to know you. And I certainly love flight, and so it's great to hear some of your passion for flight, but pouring into the younger generation and having a heart to mentor as well. So thank you for all of that.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Thanks for your time, guys.
Thank you, listeners, so much for joining us. I hope you were inspired by the interview with Rob, and I was personally inspired to look to be a loving mentor to the younger generation like he is. And so we hope that this will encourage you, and please think of someone, if you know a college student that would be encouraged by this, or a professor or a parent of a college student, forward this along to them, please. And please don't forget to like or subscribe or follow wherever you are listening to this. And our challenge for you this week is to initiate at least one Christ-centered conversation.